So we've spent the last few weeks reading a few different nonfiction narratives, and we are getting prepared to write our own nonfiction narrative. But in order to do that, we need to understand the elements that are in these narratives. So a personal narrative is a true story about the writer's own life. In a personal narrative, the writer uses the first person point of view to relate experiences and events. So think about Woodson's From Brown Girl Dreaming. She used first person point of view. So pronouns like I, me, and my. There are 6 elements of a nonfiction narrative. The first one is a conflict or a problem. The second one is a clear sequence of events. The third are details that show the time and place. The fourth is dialogue. The fifth is descriptive details and sensory language. And the sixth is a conclusion or ending. So let's look at what these 6 elements mean. So what is a conflict or problem? So a conflict or the problem could be external or internal. An external conflict is the struggle between a character and an outside force. And an internal conflict is the struggle that takes place inside a character's mind. So if you look at the example from Wagon Train at Dusk, the father discussed how his diorama was destroyed by his dog, and that is an external conflict. It's happening with an outside force. If you think of an internal conflict, we can kind of remember Woodson in Brown Girl Dreaming, where she wished that she could be just like her sister. So that was an internal conflict that she had. Sequence of events. So in your nonfiction narrative, you need to make sure that you have some type of sequence. So if we look at the example of Wagon Train at Dusk, the author tells us the order in which the events happened, and he does it sequentially. So first, he wanted to be just as good as his classmate, if we're thinking of Wagon Train at Dusk. He then created a masterpiece. After that, his dog ate it. After that, he still decided to present it anyway. After that, everyone loved it. And finally, he explained the lesson he learned to his daughter. So we can see that has a first, next, then, and last. Details showing time and place. So the example I put was Wagon Train at Dusk. The author tells us when the story is happening in the 6th grade. We can also infer that he is creating a project for his history class because the author uses the details American history. So I just took a screenshot of part of Wagon Train at Dusk, and you can see that where it's underlined, it says when I was in 6th grade. So we know that this is looking back at when this person was in school. And we also see that it was underlined where it says a scene from American history. So that's where we can make the inference that he's making some type of project in his school for history class. Dialogue. Dialogue is a conversation between 2 characters. So we saw a lot of that in Wagon Train at Dusk. We also saw a lot of that in Woodson's memoir. So make sure that you have dialogue in your nonfiction narrative. So you'll know it's dialogue because you'll see quotation marks. If you look at the example I put, you can see from Wagon Train at Dusk, you can see where I underlined where each person was talking. And you know because there are quotation marks after each sentence and before it. Sensory language. So these are details that you can observe through your senses. Sight, taste, smell, touch, and sound. And a conclusion. So there are many ways to end your story. You could rephrase your opening. You could tell your feelings. You could talk about a lesson learned. You could hope about the future or give the reader an update.
Writing a Personal Narrative. Episode 5. Writing a Closing. A personal narrative is a true story about your life. You write about something that has happened to you. A closing is the very end of your story. It's also called a conclusion. We write closings to wrap up our story. We want our writing to sound finished. We also want to remind the reader of the main idea of our story. There are many ways to end a story. Here are a few ideas. You can rephrase your opening. You can tell your feelings about what happened. You might describe what you learned. You can give a hope about the future. Or you can give the reader an update. Now let's look at each of those ideas a little more closely. You can rephrase your opening. This helps remind the reader of the main idea of your story. It's important to not use the same exact sentences as your opening, though, because that would be boring. You want to say it with different words. For example, if your opening said, "Have you ever been to the zoo? I had a blast at the zoo this weekend." Your closing might say, "My trip to the zoo was so awesome. Don't you want to visit the zoo now?" I reminded the reader that my whole story was about how fun my trip to the zoo was, but I said it in a different way. Another way you could end your story is to tell your feelings about what happened. For example, if your story is about getting a new toy at the store, your ending might say, "I love my new toy so much. I can't wait to play with it even more." This ending is way more exciting than just saying, "Last, I got home and played with my toy." To end your story, you could also tell a lesson you learned from your experience. For example, if your story is about a time you slipped on ice and broke your arm, your closing might say, "Next time it snows, I will definitely be on the lookout for slippery ice." That sounds a lot better than just ending with, "Then I went home from the hospital." Another option is to end your story with something that you hope will happen in the future. If your story is about going to the swimming pool, your closing could say, "I hope I can go back to the pool again before the weather gets cold." Lastly, if you're writing about something that happened a long time ago, you might give the reader an update. For example, if you write about the day your baby's sister was born, your closing might say, "Now my baby sister is 2 years old. She gets cuter and cuter every day." Now I'm going to write my closing. Here's the personal narrative I've already written about the day I got a dog. Have you ever felt so happy you could cry? That's how I felt last summer when my mom told me I could get a dog. I had wanted a dog for so long. I couldn't believe I was finally going to get one. First, my mom came to my room to talk to me. She told me since I had gotten good grades at school, I could get a dog. I was so excited. I jumped up in the air. Then we got in the car to drive to the store. I couldn't wait. I smiled the whole way there. When we pulled up, I saw that the store had a lot of dogs that needed to be adopted. When we got to the store, I looked at all of the dogs. They were all so cute. All of a sudden, one came up and licked my foot. He was white and fluffy and so adorable. I decided he was the dog for me. Finally, we put him in the car to take him home. He was wagging his tail and sticking his tongue out. On our way home, we stopped to get him some toys, food, and a collar. So now I need a conclusion. I'm going to first write my feelings. I'll write, "I couldn't believe I had a dog of my own. I was so happy." Next, I'm going to update the reader about what my dog is like now. I will write, Now I've had my dog for 2 months, and he is a really great pet. I think he is the best dog in the world. That's it. The draft of my personal narrative is complete. Check out episode 6 if you want to see how I revise my story.
So those are the 6 elements of a nonfiction narrative, and you guys are going to use what you just learned to find those elements in a nonfiction narrative.